The year was 1865, and the frontier stank of dust, whiskey, and sweat. That night in the small town of Red Hollow, the square outside the saloon had been cleared for business of the ugliest sort. A rough-hewn platform stood under lantern light, boards creaking with every bootstep of the auctioneer. Men packed tight around it, hats tipped back, eyes mean or hungry, some laughing loud enough to cover the silence of others who had already drunk too much to care. Above them all, the autumn wind drove grit into mouths and eyes, the kind of wind that scoured a soul bare. On the platform, a woman in shackles stood stiff as stone. Her dress, what was left of it, was torn at the hem, dirty with travel and ash. Rust-colored bruises showed at her wrists where the iron bit her skin. She stared at no one, though the crowd drank her in with the greedy eyes of men who hadn't seen tenderness in years. She tried to stand tall, though her shoulders sagged and the thinness of her cheeks betrayed hunger. Somewhere in her silence was a scream that no one there would hear. The auctioneer, a man with a gut that strained his vest and a voice slick with cruelty, raised his hand for quiet. "Gentlemen, I present you tonight's prize. A fine piece of stock near enough to 27 years, fit for work and fit for, well, whatever else you choose." He grinned, and laughter rolled over the square like a wave. The woman shut her eyes. The noise felt like claws scraping across her chest. She remembered another life. Sunlight spilling through a cabin window, her husband's laugh, the sound of a baby's cry that never drew breath. She had buried both child and man before the world turned dark, before debt and betrayal drove her into the hands of men who sold what they could not own. She clenched her teeth and told herself she would not break here, not before them. "Start the bidding at $50, the auctioneer barked. A man with rotten teeth shouted, "50! Another laughed and raised it to 60. Whiskey-soaked voices piled higher, 70, 80, 100. The numbers rose like smoke, each one another nail in the coffin of her dignity. From the edge of the crowd, a figure leaned against a hitching post, watching. He wore a long duster that had seen too many winters, and a hat pulled low, shadowing eyes as gray as river stone. His face was worn, not by drink or laughter, but by hard work and harder loss. He did not cheer nor spit, nor nudge the man beside him. He only watched, jaw tight, as though measuring something far beyond the cruelty of the moment. His name was Eli McGraw, though few said aloud unless they needed him. A rancher, a widower, a man raising a boy in a land that didn't forgive weakness. The bidding climbed to $130. The crowd roared. The woman swayed, dizzy with exhaustion, but held her chin high. Somewhere behind the laughter, she heard the faintest whisper of a child's voice in her memory. She clung to it as if it were rope. The auctioneer slammed his hand down. 130, going once. A quiet voice cut through the racket. 150. It wasn't loud, but it carried, clear as a church bell. The crowd turned. Eli McGraw stepped forward, dust rising around his boots. His hands were steady at his sides, his eyes fixed not on the woman's body but on her face, as though daring her to look back. The auctioneer blinked. 150 from the rancher. Well, didn't know you had taste in such company, Eli. Laughter again, crueler this time. Men slapped knees, shouted insults. One spat on the ground and barked. "What's a widower want with chained bride?" Eli's jaw worked. Then he said, calm as a sunrise, "My son needs her." The words landed like a stone in water, rippling silence across the crowd. The laughter faltered. Some cursed under their breath. The woman's eyes snapped open. She had been bracing for another crude claim, another filthy joke. Instead, she found herself staring at a man who spoke not of want, but of need tied to a child, not to lust. The auctioneer recovered fast, forcing a sneer. 150. Any more? No one answered. Mockery lost its teeth against Eli's steady tone. He stepped forward, laid the bills down, and waited for the key. When the shackles opened, the woman nearly stumbled, but she caught herself. He didn't touch her, didn't drag her, only tipped his hat once and said, "Come on." She hesitated. Pride burned hotter than shame. "Don't think by me means I'll bow." Her voice was ragged but sharp, like a blade half broken yet dangerous. Eli met her eyes. Didn't buy you for me. I bought you for him. He nodded past the crowd toward the edge of town. There, half hidden in the shadows, a boy of about 8 stood by a wagon, pale, watchful, clutching the reins with hands too small for the task. His eyes, his father's eyes, never left her. Something shifted in her chest. Though she hid it, she turned, walked past Eli, and climbed into the wagon without another word. The ride out of Red Hollow was silent, but thick with questions. The boy sat stiff on the bench, sneaking glances at her, as if unsure whether she might vanish like smoke. Eli drove with steady hands, guiding the team through the night. She sat rigid, arms wrapped around herself, staring at the moonlit prairie rolling endless on either side. At last she spoke, voice low. Why? Eli didn't look at her. Because he hasn't laughed in 2 years. Because he asked me every night why his ma left and never came back. Because a boy needs more than a man's silence to raise him. She said nothing. The wind swallowed her thoughts, though her heart beat louder for them. Hours later, the wagon creaked into a valley where cottonwoods bent over a creek and a ranch house crouched against the hills. Not much. A weathered roof, a few outbuildings, fences stretching into darkness, but it held the shape of a life wrestled from unforgiving earth. Eli lifted the boy down, then nodded toward the house. You'll have food, water, a bed. She climbed down stiffly, legs weak from chains and travel. The boy hovered near, studying her with solemn curiosity. She forced a faint smile, though it cracked like dry wood. Inside, the house smelled of smoke, leather, and something faintly sweet, maybe a pie once baked, long ago. She ate bread and stew in silence, each by the battle against pride. When Eli showed her to a small room, she paused in the doorway. This doesn't make me yours, she said. He looked at her evenly, never said it did. Then he turned away, his boots echoing down the hall. She lay on the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in months, she wasn't cold. The iron was gone from her wrists, though its memory lingered. She turned her face to the wall, fighting tears she hadn't shed since the day her world broke apart. From the hallway came the faint creak of the boy's footsteps. A shadow filled the doorway. He didn't speak, just stood there, watching his small frame outlined by lamplight. Then he whispered, so soft she almost missed it. Ma! The word cracked her heart wide. She pressed her hand over her mouth, stifling a sob, and turned away so he wouldn't see. He slipped back down the hall, leaving her in silence. Outside, the wind moaned across the prairie, carrying with it the laughter of men long gone and the promise of battles yet to come. Inside, for the first time since her chains, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, the night held something more than sorrow. And so began a bond neither laughter nor iron could break. The morning came hard and raw, with the light breaking over the ridges in a blaze of copper. The woman woke to the sound of cattle bawling, and a rooster crowing loud enough to split the silence. For a moment she forgot where she was, her hands twitching toward shackles that no longer bound them. Then the smell of coffee drifted under the door, mingled with the dry, sharp scent with smoke, and memories settled like a stone in her chest. She was in a stranger's house, a widower's house, bought with money and words she did not yet understand. She rose, smoothed the wrinkled fabric of her dress, and stepped into the main room. The boy was perched at the table, chewing a crust of bread, his legs swinging above the floor. Eli McGraw was already at the stove, lifting a blackened pot from the fire. His movements were measured, silent, the kind of silence that spoke of a man who'd learned to live without asking or explaining. Sit, he said, not looking at her. She did, though her back stayed rigid. The boy's eyes darted to hers, curious but cautious, as though she might vanish or explode. When Eli set down a bowl of beans before her, she hesitated, then lifted a spoon. The warmth filled her stomach, but not her heart. You'll need to pull your weight, Eli said, still not looking at her. Ranch don't run on its own. I didn't come here to be your hired hand, she snapped. He met her gaze at last, steady as a river stone. Didn't bring you here for me. I meant what I said. For him. He nodded toward the boy, who ducked his head, suddenly fascinated with his crust of bread. The woman felt heat rise in her cheeks. She wanted to throw the bowl back, to storm out into the empty prairie. But the prairie had no mercy, and she knew it. So instead she ate in silence, her thoughts circling like hawks. The day unfolded in work, hauling water from the creek, feeding the chickens, mending a shirt so ragged it barely held thread. The boy followed her with the shy persistence of shadow, watching every move. Once, he handed her a wooden horse he'd carved from scrap pine. Its legs were uneven, its head too large, but the effort in it made her throat ache. "Did you make this?" she asked softly. He nodded. "For Ma," he whispered. Then his eyes widened, and he clutched the toy back, ashamed of what he'd said. She reached out, touched his hair gently. "Keep it," she said. Her voice broke on the words. By noon, she was bone-tired. The ranch stretched vast in every direction, fences sagging, cattle thin from drought. Eli worked from dawn without pause, mending posts, throwing hay, his shirt dark with sweat. He never raised his voice, never lingered, but each task he set his hands to carry the weight of survival. She watched him from the porch, a question forming against her will. How many years had he carried it alone? That night, the town's poison seeped into their valley. Eli rode in for supplies, leaving her to mind the boy. He returned with his jaw tight, a cut on his cheekbone. When she asked, he only said, "Men talk too much when they drink." But later, when the boys slept, she pressed again. "What did they say?" He leaned against the doorframe, arms folded, eyes in shadow. "Said I bought myself a slave. Said you cut my throat in my sleep. Said I was a fool for thinking a woman would stay where she don't want to be." Her hands curled into fists. "They're not wrong. You did by me." His gaze lifted, sharp as a knife. "No, I freed you. Don't confuse the two." The words hung between them, heavy as iron. She turned away, but something in her chest shifted, unsettled. Days became weeks. Trust came slow, like water dripping through stone. She taught the boy small things. How to stitch a tear, how to season stew with a pinch of sage. At night, she told him stories, nothing grand, just scraps of memory from a world that seemed impossibly far. His laughter, thin at first, grew stronger. Each time it reached her ears, she felt both ache and relief. But the world beyond the ranch didn't forget. One evening, 3 men rode up, drunk and jeering, their horses stamping dust into the yard. She was outside with the wash when they called her name, her auction name, spat like a curse. "Look at the rancher's bride," one hollered. "Bet she sings sweeter in bed than in chains." The boy froze on the porch, eyes wide with fear. Eli came out of the barn, shotgun balanced casual, but sure in his hands. His voice was low. "Steady. You're on my land. Time you left." They laughed, spitting tobacco into the dirt. One reached for his holster, but Eli's finger tightened just enough on the trigger to end the thought. Tension crackled like lightning in dry air. Finally, with curses and threats, the men turned their horses and rode off into the dusk. She stood trembling, fists clutching the damp laundry. Eli lowered the gun, met her eyes. "They won't be the last." That night, by the fire, she told him the truth. Her husband had been a gambler, careless with debts. When he died in a knife fight, the men he owed came for her. She'd been taken, traded, sold. She spoke in a flat voice, as though each word might burn her tongue if given too much feeling. Eli listened, silent, his face unreadable. When she finished, she said only, "I'm sorry." She laughed bitterly. "Sorry don't change chains." "No," he said, "but it can break them if you let it." The fire popped between them, sending sparks into the night. The weeks hardened into winter. Snow came early, blanketing the valley, driving wolves down from the hills. One night, their howls circled the ranch, closer and closer. The cattle bawled in panic. Eli and the woman rushed into the storm, rifles in hand. The boy huddled in the doorway with fear in his eyes. The night was chaos. Shadows lunged at the herd, teeth flashing, eyes gleaming. Gunfire cracked. Smoke and snow tangled in her lungs. She fired, hand shaking, missing once, then finding her mark. A wolf yelped, crumpling into the snow. Eli fought like a man who'd spent his whole life defending what little he had. Together they drove the pack back into the timber, hearts pounding, breath ragged. When it was done, they stood side by side in the bloody snow, the cattle still restless but alive. The woman's hands trembled on the rifle, but her eyes burned with something fierce, something alive. Eli looked at her, a long, steady look that said more than words could. Back inside, the boy ran to her, clinging to her skirts. She knelt, wrapped her arms around him, tears freezing on her cheeks. Eli closed the door against the wind, his face softened by firelight. For the first time since her capture, she felt no chains. For the first time, she wondered if this place, this boy, this quiet man, might hold something she thought forever lost. But even as warmth settled in the cabin, she knew danger still prowled beyond the walls. And she knew the men who laughed in Red Hollow would not let silence be the last word. The thaw of spring came late that year, as if winter refused to loose its grip on the valley. Snowmelt ran fast through the creek, muddying the banks, and the air still bit at the skin when the wind swept down from the high ridges. Yet in the McGraw house there was warmth, of a kind none of them had felt in years. The woman, whose name Eli had learned was Clara, moved through the rooms with purpose now. Her steps no longer sounded like those of a stranger, but of someone trying to mend broken ground. She cooked, mended, and worked alongside Eli, and when night came she sat by the boy, reading scraps of old newspapers aloud, as if they were scripture. But the world beyond their fences had not forgotten. The men who had laughed at Clara's auction, who had mocked Eli's quiet claim, carried a bitterness that curdled into hate. In Red Hollow, they drank and spat, saying the rancher thought himself better, thought he could turn chains into something noble. Pride and cruelty made a potent mix, and in time, they rode again. The first sign came in the form of a dead calf found near the fence line, its throat torn open. Eli studied the tracks in the mud, lips pressed thin. "Wasn't wolves," he muttered. Clara stood beside him, her breath catching at the sight. The boy clutched her hand tight, his eyes wide. Eli straightened and looked toward the horizon, where smoke from Red Hollow blurred the sky. "They're sending messages," he said. Clara felt fear knotting in her chest, but alongside it rose something sharper. Anger. Then send one back. Eli's eyes flicked to hers, steady, unreadable. He gave a small nod. The days that followed were heavy with waiting. Every creak of the windmill, every shadow moving on the ridge, set their nerves taut. Clara carried the rifle now when she fetched water, her fingers growing accustomed to the cold steel. She had once thought herself powerless, but survival had stripped that life from her. One evening, as the sun bled red across the prairie, Eli returned from checking the far pasture with blood on his sleeve. Clara rushed to him, fear tightening her throat. "You're hurt." He shook his head. "Not mine. One of them." His voice was grim. "They followed me out, tried to cut me off. I winged one. They'll be back, and not with just words." The boy listened from the doorway, his small face pale but set. Clara went to him, kneeling, her hands on his shoulders. "Whatever happened," she whispered, "you stay low, you stay quiet, and you don't let go of hope. Do you hear me?" He nodded, eyes glistening, and whispered back, "I won't let them take you." The fierceness in his voice struck her deeper than fear. That night, they did not sleep. Clara sat by the fire, rifle across her lap, while Eli sharpened his knife at the table. The rasp of steel on stone was steady, like a heartbeat. Their eyes met often, words unspoken passing between them. He saw the fire in her now, the will to fight for more than survival. She saw in him not just a stern rancher, but a man bound by duty and grief, and yet willing to risk both for her and the boy. Near midnight, the sound came, horses on hard ground, muffled curses, the clink of spurs. Eli stood, his hand tightening around the rifle. Clara's breath quickened, but her grip was steady. The boy huddled in the loft, peering through the railing, silent as stone. Shadows moved past a window, lantern light flickering on their faces. A voice called out, mocking, "McGraw, Time a hand over what ain't yours. Laughter followed, sharp and mean, like knives scraping bone. Eli stepped to the doorway, his silhouette outlined by firelight. "She's not yours to take," he said, voice even. "Everything's for the taking out here." Another voice snarled. "Step aside, and maybe we let you keep breathing." Gunmetal gleamed in the dark. Clara's heart pounded, but she lifted the rifle, sighting down the barrel toward the window. The men outside weren't expecting her voice when it rang out clear. "Try your luck, and you'll see how a woman fights when you corner her." Silence followed, broken only by the restless shifting of horses. Then a shot cracked, shattering the window. Splinters flew. Clara dropped flat and returned fire, the recoil jarring her shoulder. A curse erupted outside. Eli fired next, his shot measured, sure. Chaos burst in the yard as the gang scrambled. The boy pressed his face against the loft rail, trembling but silent. Clara kept firing, every round fueled by months of humiliation, of chains, of being sold like cattle. Each shot was a defiance, a scream turned into action. The night burned with smoke and fury. Then came the rush of footsteps on the porch. The door shuddered under a heavy boot. Eli braced it with his shoulder, gritting his teeth. "Get the boy," he barked. Clara scrambled to the loft ladder, shouting, "Stay behind me!" The boy clung to her, eyes wide with terror. Below, the door gave way. Two men burst in, pistols drawn. Eli lunged, knife flashing. One man cried out, dropping his gun as steel slashed across his arm. Clara fired from the loft, the shot blasting the second man back against the wall. The thunder of the rifle left her ears ringing, her chest heaving. Blood slicked the floor. The attackers staggered, retreating, cursing as they dragged each other out. Eli slammed the door shut again, breath ragged, his shirt torn and bloodied. Clara rushed down, the boy clinging to her skirts. "You're hurt," she said, her hands trembling as she pressed against the wound in his side. "It's nothing," Eli muttered, though his face was pale. His eyes locked on hers, fierce, unyielding. "You held the line. You and me together." The night stretched on, filled with silence and smoke. When dawn broke, the yard was empty, save for blood in the snow and hoofprints fading into the hills. The gang was broken, but not gone. The threat lingered like storm clouds on the horizon. Inside, Clara bandaged Eli's side with careful hands. He watched her, eyes softening. "Didn't think you had that fight in you." She met his gaze, her voice steady. "Chains taught me one thing. If you don't fight, you're already dead." The boy sat at the table, clutching his wooden horse. His eyes never left him. Then, in a voice small but steady, he whispered, "Ma." The word struck harder than any bullet. Clara froze, her breath caught. Tears blurred her vision, but she didn't turn away. She reached for the boy, pulling him into her arms. For the first time in years, she let herself weep, not from sorrow, but from something sharper, something brighter. Eli stood there, shoulders heavy with exhaustion, but a faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Guess he's right," he said softly. "Guess yours now. Always were." The room grew still, the fire crackling low, the morning light painting gold across the worn floorboards. The way of the night lingered, but so did something new, an unspoken promise. Clara had not chosen her chains, but she chose this moment, chose to stand, to fight, to belong. Outside, the prairie stretched endless and unforgiving, yet within the small cabin walls, a family had been forged in fire and blood. The laughter of cruel men had tried to define her, but silence and strength had written another ending. The narrator's voice, soft and reflective, would later tell it plain. What began as mockery ended in love. What began in chains ended in choice. Out here at the edge of the world, family was not given, it was made. And if this tale stirs something in your chest, don't let it fade. Share it, speak it, hold it close. For the West was more than dust and death. It was a test of the heart,